SpaceX's initial public offering is expected to raise as much as $75 billion, more than double the record-setting $29.4 billion raised by Saudi Aramco in 2019.
3 weeks before this company crossed a $2 trillion valuation, it quietly filed a single document with the federal government. And buried inside it is a number nobody said out loud on launch day. Here's the strange part. Nothing you're about to hear was leaked, and nothing was hacked. Every figure here was published, by the company itself or by the agencies that watch it. It's all public. Almost nobody just reads the paperwork. So tonight, we'll read it together, and you'll see why what they put on stage and what they put in the filing are two very different stories. On June 12, 2026, the most anticipated stock debut in the history of the rocket business went live. 555 million shares at $135 each. By the closing bell, it had jumped nearly 20%. The company was worth more than $2 trillion, and its founder became, on paper, the world's first trillionaire. The story that day was simple and thrilling. Rapid iteration, Mars on the horizon, every legacy giant suddenly looking slow. This is not a video about a failing company. It's the opposite. But 3 weeks earlier, on May 20th, that same company filed something called an S-1, the legal registration every business submits before selling stock to the public. It runs hundreds of pages, and it does one thing the press conference never did. It tells you, line by line, exactly what the rocket costs. To find the number, you do the one thing the headlines didn't. You separate the businesses. This isn't really one company. Under the accounting in the filing, 3 operations were folded into one entity: the rockets, a satellite internet network, and an AI division. Together, they reported $18.7 billion in revenue. That's the figure that makes everything look healthy. But the filing lets you pull the rocket business out and look at it alone. And alone, it tells a different story. The space segment, the part that builds and flies the rockets, brought in just over $4 billion. And it lost money. An operating loss of $657 million. Stop on that. This is the company that launches more than 80% of everything humanity sends to orbit. And the division still finished the year deep in the red. Why? Because in a single year, it poured $3 billion into developing one vehicle, the giant next-generation rocket, and it's accelerating. In just the first 3 months of the new year, that spend hit $930 million in 1 quarter, a pace approaching $3.7 billion a year and climbing. So how is it still flying? The satellite network. That division earned $11.4 billion in revenue and $4.4 billion in operating profit. In plain terms, the internet business is paying for the rocket business. And the strange shows. Company-wide, cash fell from around $25 billion to under $16 billion in 3 months. Debt climbed to roughly $29 billion. And the accumulated deficit, every loss ever carried on the books, reached $41.3 billion. Here's the part I want to be careful about. None of this is hidden. The filing discloses all of it, by law, in plain accounting. This is not a cover-up. It's something stranger. A multi-billion-dollar bet sitting in full view in a document almost nobody outside Wall Street ever opens. It's wagering everything that the rocket works before the money runs out. But believe it or not, the money is the least alarming thing in the paperwork. Because the rocket has a customer, NASA. The plan is to land American astronauts back on the moon. To see why that's so hard, leave the company's filing and open a different document. An audit published in March by NASA's own Office of Inspector General. Not the side of NASA that sells the mission, the watchdog side, whose entire job is to check the homework. And what it wrote is sobering. The moon lander can't reach the moon on a single tank of fuel. It's simply too big. So before it leaves Earth orbit, it has to be refueled in space by a fleet of other identical rockets flying up as tankers. The estimate? Between 10 and 20 separate tanker flights just to fill one fuel depot for one trip to the moon. And they can't be spread out because of a problem with a deceptively gentle name, boil-off. The fuel is cryogenic, liquid methane and liquid oxygen, hundreds of degrees below zero. In orbit, sunlight slowly warms it and it evaporates. The longer it sits, the more you lose. So the depot has to be filled fast. One launch every 6 days, and the whole sequence has to begin more than 200 days before the astronauts even leave the ground. Has anyone ever done this? No. And that's not editorializing. That's the document. The Inspector General flagged plainly that refueling at this scale has never been attempted in the history of spaceflight, and that it's still publicly unknown how the company will stop the fuel from boiling away. A second audit from the Accountability Office was blunter, finding only limited progress on the technology it would need: docking sensors, alignment hardware, even the gauges to measure the transfer. And if you think that's the hard part, you haven't seen the orbit. This is the part almost no one has reported. To find it, you go to a third agency entirely, the Federal Communications Commission, and open a Spectrum license application. A request to use certain radio frequencies, a filing so dry it's practically engineered never to be read, but inside its technical annex is a single passage that quietly rewrites the plan. Every press conference, every animation shows the same journey. Fuel up in low Earth orbit, then head straight for the moon. The FCC filing says that is not what happens. According to the document, a crewed lunar mission needs a second propellant transfer, a second full refueling, in a completely different orbit. The company has a name for it: the final tanking orbit. And it's no gentle hop. It's a stretched, highly elliptical loop, reaching from about 280 kilometers above Earth all the way out to more than 34,000 kilometers. Close to a tenth of the way to the moon. Read between the lines, and the implication is enormous. Even fully fueled in low orbit, the rocket doesn't have the performance to push a loaded lander all the way to the moon. It runs out of margin, so it has to climb partway out on its own, meet a second depot waiting in that distant orbit, fill its tanks again, and only then fire its engines for the moon. Count what that does. It doesn't add one refueling. It adds an entire second rendezvous architecture. More tanker flights, more fuel boiling off, now across two orbits. Double the difficulty of the single hardest maneuver in the mission, and it sat inside a radio frequency application the whole time. That's the line nobody read out loud. Not because it was sealed, not because anyone hid it, but because it was buried where no one thought to look. Now put two documents side by side, because that's where the real conflict lives. The NASA audit says one moon mission needs up to 20 tanker launches, fast, in a tight window. Now open the FAA's environmental ruling for the company's main launch site in Texas. It sets a hard legal ceiling, a maximum of 25 rocket launches per year from that site. 25 for everything. Do the math. One trip to the moon, at the high end, burns 20 of those 25 launches. 80% of an entire year's legal allowance, gone on a single mission. That leaves almost nothing for the commercial satellite launches that, by the company's own filing, are paying for all of it. And that ceiling assumes everything goes perfectly. It doesn't. Every failure triggers a mandatory investigation before the rocket can fly again, and the newest version's debut earlier this year did exactly that, grounding the vehicle for months. Here's the collision in the plainest terms. The engineering demands a launch about every 6 days. The law allows roughly one every 2 weeks. Those two numbers cannot both be true, and nothing in any of these documents explains how that gap gets closed. I saved the heaviest part for last, because it isn't about dollars or trajectories. It's about the people who would actually be on board. Because the lander is so enormous, when it sets down on the moon, the crew cabin sits near the top of a vehicle more than 170 feet tall. To reach the surface, the astronauts ride down the outside of the rocket in an elevator, an external lift taller, the report notes, than the Statue of Liberty from heel to head. And then comes a line in the audit that's genuinely hard to read. There is, the Inspector General writes, currently no other way for the crew to get back into the vehicle from the surface if that elevator fails. No ladder, no backup. One elevator between the astronauts and the only ship that can carry them home. NASA is tracking it as a top program risk, and on paper, it's still unsolved. And it goes further. The same report states, flatly, that NASA does not currently have the capability to rescue a crew stranded in space or on the moon. The agency looked at building one and found it too costly. So as the plans stand today, if the lander is disabled on the surface or can't lift back off to rejoin the ship waiting in orbit, there is no rescue coming. That's not a tabloid headline. It's a direct finding from NASA's own auditors in a report you can download right now. Now, I can already hear the objection, because I had it too. This is the company that catches a booster the size of a skyscraper out of the open sky. They've been told something was impossible more times than anyone in the history of flight, and they keep doing it anyway, so why bet against them now? And that's fair. If any organization on Earth can grind these problems down, It's probably this one. So notice what we did not do. We never accused anyone of hiding anything. The filing discloses the losses in full. We never said the Moon program is being canceled. No document says that. The audits call for fixes and tighter schedules, not for quitting. And we never claimed boil-off is unsolvable, only that, by the government's own account, it hasn't been solved yet. Everything here is the floor, not the ceiling. And what the paperwork proves is that the gap between the press conference and the public record is far wider than almost anyone realizes. So step back and look at the whole structure at once. A rocket that loses money on every flight. A refueling plan no one has ever attempted. A second, all-but-secret orbit hidden in a radio license filing. A legal cap the mission math blows straight through. A crew safety gap with no backup and no rescue. All of it stacked under a $2 trillion valuation. And a satellite network that, within a couple of years, depends entirely on this one rocket working. None of that means it fails. It might all get solved. People have built the impossible before. But the next time you watch a flawless animation of a ship gliding from Earth orbit to a perfect moon landing, you'll know exactly what it leaves out. Because now, you've read the same documents the animators didn't put on screen. If you want more of this, real numbers, straight from the filings, no hype in either direction, stick around. Because the next document we open is about the very next flight. What the company's newest booster just did in the last few weeks that says that launch is closer than anyone's admitting. That one's coming soon. I'll see you there.